and it's Kesser Shem Tov Nun Tes. And the tzaddik writes as follows: Yesh b'china, he says, there's an aspect that we encounter in life, she'achar loisa lemala, that after a person has an aliyah, after a person has an elevation, an experience of success, things are going well, whether it's in ruchniya, spiritually speaking, tefillas are strong with kavana, and learning is going well, or it's in gashmias, or just generally speaking, a person's in a good mood, things are working out financially, health-wise, family-wise, whatever it is. So sometimes there's an experience that after having that experience of an aliyah, it could be that chayzer v'yored. It could be that a person will slip and a person descends again. And that's an experience that all of us, I think, have experienced in one way or another. And the reason for that is, says the Baal Shem Tov, kedei lahalos madregas hatachtonos, is actually so that a person is capable in rising again and in trying and striving to lift oneself up from having slipped and descended, to lift up whatever was lost spiritually in that place, because the neshama is like a magnet. The Ar Chaim HaKadosh says that the reason for galus, I think I mentioned this also in the past, the reason for exile, that Am Yisrael was divided and split up and sent all around the world, is because Am Yisrael is supposed to be a magnet. We are a magnet for Kedusha. We're a magnet, Kabbalistically speaking, for sparks of holiness that were lost and embedded in all of nature and all of physicality and every facet and aspect of the human experience. And in our natural state, when the whole nation is unified and we're in our place, plugged in, so to speak, to the outlet that powers this electromagnetic force, it's so strong that all of the sparks of Kedusha are able to come to that place of the Beis HaMikdash, to that place naturally. We don't have to go anywhere. But what happened was, says the Ar Chaim, once there's sinas chinam, once there's division, once there's hatred, once there's pirud and separation, so like a magnet, if it's a gigantic magnet, it has that much more compounded energy. I think that's the case. We have to look that up physically in physics. But I think that's true, that the bigger the magnet, the more force it has. But if you take that very magnet and you shatter it into millions of small magnets, each magnet and each piece in and of itself is much weaker. And so he says it was a result of the sinas chinam and the division that required HaKadosh Baruch Hu to send this magnetic nation, as it were, out into the world, so that each and every singular individual community or each and every individual Jew, where he is or she is able to connect to the sparks of Kedusha that are in that place, that are connected to that particular neshama, instead of the much more ideal way of us just being as we're meant to be. And from that place, a love Yinaru Amim, the pasuk says, right, where all the nations of the world will flood like Yinaru, like a Nahar, right, toward that place. Obviously, that's more ideal. But because this is our post-exile, destruction of the Beis HaMikdash state, this is the way that it is. And there are madrigos tachtonos that have nitzotzes to kedusha, that have holy sparks. And when a person descends into that place and then finds within him or herself the strength to do tshuva, and whether it's tshuva beruchnius or whether it's tshuva, like I mentioned, begashmius, Rav Kook, right, is mechadesh. He innovates this idea of tshuva beguf, that a person who's exercising, a person who's focusing on their physical or their fiscal or their familial health, on whatever level it is, that's a bechina, that's an aspect of tshuva. When a person does that, they lift up those sparks that had connected themselves to that magnetic neshama in the descent, and is able to bring them back up. So it's all min hashamayim. That's the way that life is supposed to be. Always reminding people all the time, we're not angels, we're not meant to be angels. What we are meant to do is to aspire to be angelic. That's all we can do. Will we succeed? We absolutely will not succeed. We absolutely should not succeed. If a person succeeds in being an angel, they should check themselves out. Because I like to say, you may have succeeded in being an angel, but automatically you failed at being human, right? And what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted was humans. Hashem didn't want an angel. Hashem has angels in the olam of Beria, Yitzira, and even the spiritual aspect of Asiya, but not in this olam HaGashmi. Here, we're humans, and humans rise, and humans fall, and it's min hashamayim.
Is there an aspect of kind of momentum of the aliyah? Is that right? You got the right momentum. Now I'm sending you somewhere where you can use that momentum.
Possible. Lifnei shever ga'oin, the pasuk says, right? Before shever, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sometimes raises a person up, and maybe, like you're saying very beautifully, it's like supercharging that soul with enough spiritual power to be able to go into that place and rise. Yeah.
Is there a way to articulate sparks in more like sort of human terms? Does that make sense?
Yeah. The doctrine of the nitzotzos, of these sparks, which sounds very mystical and abstract, is a huge sugya. Generally speaking, it's associated with the idea of galus hashchina, right? This idea that when Am Yisrael went into exile, the Shechina went into exile with them, right? There's a very beautiful medrash that the Piasetzner Rebbe brings at the beginning of Chavos HaTalmidim, very, very beautiful, where he says that all of the different levels of the nation were exiled, the Kohanim and the Leviim and the Tzaddikim, and the Shechina stayed and stayed and stayed until the little children were taken into exile. When the little children were taken into exile, so then the Shechina left with them. And the idea of the Shechina being in Galus, well, first we have to know what the Shechina is, and then we can talk about it being in exile. The Shechina is the latent potential for godliness within the physical world. Latent means it's hidden, it's not activated, but it's there and dependent on our human consciousness to be aware of it and to engage with it, and then we free it, and then we access it. The sparks are potential experiences of holiness that are embedded in every single aspect of physicality. Case in point, Ragalach, Exhibit A. Right? We have these Ragalach, there are nitzotzos to Kedusha, there are sparks in holiness in there. How do you activate them? Making a bracha with kavana, and having intention in eating this to give us a bit of a sugar boost for the shir, right? A person gets a little bit more energy, and whatever our intention is, if a person has a holy intention, or simply to enjoy the world that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made, this is an encounter with godliness, you freed the spark.
And I suppose my follow-up would be, so is that something that you would experience? So if you eat the chocolate, that you kind of experience the elevation, or is it something that you kind of know intellectually? So there's a spark, and I've been told that the bracha elevates the spark, or is there a sense of it?
It begins with the intellect. When the pasuk says v'yadata hayom, the first thing is to know, and that's what we do in all the shirim. Really, all we can ever do is just fill our minds with the knowledge. The pasuk continues v'hashivose el levavecha. Right? There's an idea that's brought down in Tanya, many svarim, moach shalit ala lev. The mind is able to guide and to impact the feelings, the emotional feelings of the heart. Based on our level of consciousness, based on our prism or perspective through which we see the world, then mela, the emotions follow. And so it might begin as a purely sort of dry doctrine, but the more a person leans into this on the level of emunah, and they actually begin to live life in such a way, like I am a spark seeker, right? It transforms my whole identity. Like this is what I'm here to do. I was a soul in the world of Bria, next to the Kesser HaKavod. Hashem put me into a physical body for the purpose of being a magnet to activate godliness. That's going to be an emotional experience. It's two completely different experiences of a ragala, that a person just takes it and stuffs his face, or a person takes it and eats a ragala consciously. It's the holiest thing. And that is intended and eventually will become an emotional experience, but it could be that in the beginning we first just need to know about it, and then the more that we start to learn these teachings and the more that these teachings impact our perspective, the more that it changes our emotional, experiential experience of life. That's the goal. Right? That's really the goal.
You can still do it afterwards.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you're like, oh, I didn't have the kavanah.
You do
right
tshuva.
there and then try and elevate it.
That's right. Okay, so let's go back inside. So he says, he says, the pasuk says, "Rachatzi raglai, I've cleaned my feet." And the raglayim, we learned last week's year, the raglayim, right, raglai yardis mabes, that's the lower aspects of kedusha that are like the feet, get a little bit dirty, muddied below in the physical world. And a person's able to rachatzti raglai, a person's able to cleanse those lower madrigas in the tshuva and in the elevation that a person strengthens him or herself to experience after you read, after a descent. This is the pasuk in Yecheskel that says Ratzoi v'Shaiv. That says that Yecheskel saw the angels running and returning. Ratzoi v'Shaiv. And all the Svarim, beginning with the Baal Shem, all the Talmidim, applied this experience to the human condition. All of life is Ratzoi v'Shaiv. There's going to be times of running, which means times of aliyah, times of excitement, times of connection, times of passion. And then there's going to be times of shayv. And that's part of life. That's part of life. We do ourselves a tremendous disservice by sort of excising and cutting out the experience of shoiv from the human condition. And all we give people is, you got to do this, you got to do that, and we should strive, and why don't you do this, and why don't you... And we forget, like, we're also humans. You have to treat both of those in a balanced way. And balance is the key in terms of what we learn, in terms of how we learn, how we think. Balance is the secret of what it means to be a Jew. Balance. Ratzai v'shoy v'nikra katnos v'gadlos. This is called times of katnos. Sometimes you'll hear in the Sfarim, right, moichin de katnos, right? So difficult to translate. It means constricted consciousness. A person's, tunnel vision. Sometimes when a person's angry or a person's in a state, I experience this all the time, of self-doubt, all of a sudden you begin to interpret every little thing as a proof that, that's katnos. That's katnos. Godless is nothing can faze you. Let's use the word confidence. Confidence is a perfect example of godless. When a person's in a confident space, it doesn't matter. They'll mow the whole thing down. Nothing can stand in their way. No obstacles, no challenges. On the contrary, if people are challenging them, they'll find a way, to get around it, or to convince those people, or to find a way over and above, right? Like they say in Lubavitch, yeah, Reb Zali, l'chatchila river, right? You can get over all obstacles, but in katnos, can be the most talented person in the world, the person with the most abilities that other people are able to see in this person, all of what they're capable of. But if the person himself or herself is in katnos, they can't do a thing. Rabbi Nachman says this also in a different way in Likutei Moharan, which we'll get to, hopefully for those who are joining us. That was a good sound effect for Likutei Moharan. Yeah, gonna rev the engines. So he says, "B'chol yirida tzarich azhara." It says the Baal Shem Tov, but it's tricky business, very tricky business. This experience of aliyas and yeridas, because what's the greatest danger in the world? You get stuck. It's possible to get stuck. A person who doesn't know about this model, this theological framework, whose expectations aren't adjusted appropriately, is much more likely to get stuck. Right? Because they're likely to have their aliyah, and then their first real yerida, right, which usually happens when a person's a teenager, young teenager, whatever it is. And if they don't have what I call a theology of sin, right, which we bichlal don't give over in our schools, so they don't know that, this is okay, this is part of the journey. On the contrary, this is why you were sent to the world, to struggle and grapple, and sometimes lose, and sometimes win, and then they're very likely to get stuck. And by the way, getting stuck doesn't mean that, the yarmulke comes off and then they stop with tefillin and they stop with everything and they go off, so to speak, off the derech. It's not what getting stuck means. Getting stuck means that they might continue to do everything right on the checklist. Something inside is dead. Something inside died. Because there's a part of them that believes, and I can speak for my own self, there was a part of me that believed before I got in touch with her that I was finished. I was the biggest Russia in the world. Because I experienced, my humanity as a budding adolescent, like all of us do. And I didn't have any framework around that. All I knew was that this is usher, and so, these are the worst aveiros in the world, etc., etc., etc. And so a person dies inside. How are you going to daven properly if you feel that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no interest in hearing from you because of X, Y, Z, right? How are you gonna daven properly? You're finished. So says the Baal Shem Tov, I'm revealing to you the secret that this is part of the journey of life. But you have to be very careful not to get stuck. There are going to be yeridas in life. Don't get too comfortable with them. Don't get too comfortable with them. So tzarich azhara, says the Baal Shem, who it wasn't his way to give warnings and musar, this wasn't his thing. But he says over here, we need a warning. Eich lach zar v'la alois, shelo yisha'er chas v'shalom. Can't get stuck. Because there were many who got stuck. And what a shame. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent us to the world to lift up the sparks, and then we go into the place where we're supposed to get the sparks, right? Not because we try to go there, but because that's life. And a person goes through ups and downs and days and nights and summers and winters and mountains and valleys. All of life is like this, right? And then instead of doing our mission of getting those sparks and running back home, chas v'shalom, we deepen we deepen the mess. We deepen it. What a shame. What a shame. So we need tremendous chizuk, no matter what a person's going through, and no matter what a person feels they're stuck in. On the contrary, b'makom shebali tshuva aimdim. This is part of the reason why. In the place where the bali tshuva stand, the greatest tzaddikim couldn't stand, because when they do tshuva, and that's what Rabbi Yitzchak told one of the biggest sinners in Berditchev. He said, "I'm jealous of you. I'm jealous of you because if you do tshuva, all of your averis." And we assume that he had many more averis than the British had mitzvahs, right? Because you could do averis, you could do all the time. Mitzvahs a little bit more tricky. They'll all turn into mitzvahs, which means, how does that work? Because those experiences were functional, right? They weren't wasted. That's really what it means. You turn an experience of an avera that presumably on one level is a waste. Right? It's a waste of time. It's a waste of an experience. You don't get anything out of it. It's full of sheker and emptiness, etc., etc., etc. And in returning, you actually turns that somehow into a mitzvah, which is an incredibly counterintuitive and paradoxical and almost dangerous thing to say. Mamish, a dangerous doctrine. If it wasn't Chazal, who would dare say such a thing? You could turn an aveira into a mitzvah through tshuva. How? Because the experience of tshuva reveals retroactively that the whole reason that a person went into that place was for a purpose. It's nothing we could plan, and that's why the Gemara is very careful to warn, which I've said also in the past. Ha'imar echte va'ashav, a person who says, I'm going to sin, and then do tshuva, ein maspikin biyad alas tshuva. You can't school the system. It doesn't work that way. It has to be authentic. We speak about authentic tshuva because we speak about authentic sin. Right? And authentic sin doesn't mean like aver lishma. Authentic sin means that despite our very best efforts to stay away, and despite our very best efforts to put down guidelines and guardrails to prevent us from falling in with the Yetzer Hara, life happens. And when life happens, the Baal Shem Tov is giving us a framework to be able to immediately recognize, I was sent here. Like Yosef HaTzadik. I don't happen to be in this place. I was sent to this place. And I have a job to do. And that job is called tshuva. See, understand, this is a completely different approach to tshuva. Meaning on a standard level, sinning is pointless, and you're going to go to the opposite of Gan Eden, and it's going to be terrible for you, and you better do tshuva really quickly. That's like the standard understanding of tshuva with the chizuk, so to speak. But over here, it's a whole different thing. It's a whole different model. Where it's not b'diavad you fell into it. It's that it must be that if I'm here, now that I'm here, with all of the brokenheartedness that I feel, and the pain that I feel, and the shame that I feel, and the frustration that I feel. Rabbi Nachman says, we say every morning, Shaloi lidei, we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu not to bring us lidei nisayon, velo lidei bizayon. Says Rabbi Nachman, nisayon is before the avera, bizayon is after the avera. Right? A person feels a bizayon. All of us know what that feels like. A bizayon. I was thinking this morning, many times we look at some people who are distant from Yiddishkeit and it looks like they're having so much fun, and from our perspective, it's like really difficult. How are you gonna convince people, who are clubbing and are going out and having all the pleasures in the world easily, like today everything's on your fingertips. If you don't have, moral guidelines, you can do whatever you want today. Like everything's accessible. How are you gonna get them to? And then I was remembering that all the excitement is only before the act. The minute the act is finished, it's absolutely meaningless. They can't wait to get out of the club and go home and it's done. It's finished. It's finished. It's a pasuk in Navi, forgetting who, somebody will remind me because it's famous and I should know. I'm embarrassed that I don't. Had an illicit relationship with a woman, and by force, huh?
David.
Not David.
It was told.
Avshalom. And the pasuk says that right after he finished the act, he hated her. It's a crazy pasuk, amazing pasuk. Who?
Yeah,
it was Amnon and Tamar who had that.
Amnon
hated her so much after.
That's the pasuk. I wish I had a nach in front of me and read the pasuk inside. But it's so powerful because it's so true about the human condition. That's the Yetzer Hara. Builds it up, builds it up, builds it up, builds it up. And it isn't like it even tapers down. It's just You can't.
It was this
Reverse
it was
telescope,
this.
they
It
call
was
it.
this
Huh?
Reverse telescope.
What do you mean reverse
As in,
telescope?
like first when it starts, it looks like a telescope. Like try to hone and everything, and when it's finished, they reverse the telescope, makes it look like
Very
I wanna
distant.
push it as far
Ah.
as possible. I wanna.
So that's what we're talking about, right? So to remind ourselves, like, yeah, we have something incredibly powerful. Because what are all those people going to do in the moment after? People need a framework for meaningful living. People don't need peak moments of dopamine. People need a real framework. And on the contrary, the people who look like they're having all the peak experiences are usually the ones who are most desperate, for something real. And we have something real. We have 2,000 years of something real in our pocket. Confidence. Godless. Can change the world. We have to. We will.
Based on understanding Teshuvah as like a process, not just of like up and down, and really the point of it is just to go back up rather than where I went is where I needed to be for whatever reason, and there's something in there. Can Teshuvah have a double meaning of A, yes, going back, but B, going back to why was I there? What am I taking out?
Beautiful.
What is this?
Beautiful. I'll bring you a raya to what you're saying. It's a pasuk.
Right.
You have to touch it a little bit differently. But the pasuk says, "K'chu imachem devarim v'shuv al Hashem." It's my humble interpretation. I didn't see it in a sefer, but I like to say that tshuva. You can't just do tshuva. K'chu imachem devarim. Take things with you. What the pasuk means, if you look in Rashi, it means "K'chu imachem devarim" is tefillah and words of tshuva vidui. I say devarim can mean words. It can mean things. Take something. You were there. Take something. You were there for a reason. You learned something. You turned the Avera into a mitzvah. K'chui machem devarim v'shuv al Hashem. Return to Hashem with something in your pocket. I'm sure what Rabbi Yitzi is saying.
But, that sounds more like something you would say on a human level as well. It doesn't sound so much. It sounds like something you can on your own sense of it.
Both are true.
Yeah.
And it could be according to the Baal Shem Tov, Hainu Hach.
Yeah.
In the Baal Shem Tov, metaphysics is always true on an experiential human level. Meaning anything, and that was the Baal Shem Tov's chiddush, that if you read the Ari, it's just sort of abstract Kabbalistic terminology. And the Baal Shem Tov says, all of these things, you know them, because it's just a different language, but you experience them.
So, I would, not that I know anything about this stuff, but just I would want to, my instinct would be to say that it's only that. It's not that it's true as well on the human level. It's that the metaphysical level is just theoretical description of what
yeah, it can be. But again, we can't either forget the Arizal, and the Arizal is presenting to us a metaphysical structure where it would appear to transcend in our sort of base level human experience. Say both on both levels.
It in that way.
Yeah, very much, because we're primarily spiritual beings. If I only limit my experience to the physical, it's going to be limited. But let's think about this a little bit more. Last few minutes, let's try to push into the next piece. Be'ezus Hashem. May Baal Shem Tov. Thank you for coming here, B'yitzi. Have a great week. May Baal Shem Tov, the Heilige Tzaddik, says, Hapasuk kol asher timtza yadcha la'asos b'kochacha aseh. Whatever you can accomplish, do with koach. B'kochacha aseh. And the pasuk continues. The pasuk in Koheles, Ki ein masa v'cheshbon v'das v'chachma b'sha'al asher ata holech shama. Because in Sha'al, in the place where after a person leaves the world, there's no action, there's no cheshbon, there's no calculation, there's no wisdom, intellect, nothing. And so, meaning hayom la'asosam, this is the time to do. This is the realm of accomplishments, the world of asiya, right? It's the world of action. Better act now because le'a mesa mi'halaluka, right? Okay, says the Baal Shem, an amazing thing. He brings a medrash, and the medrash speaks about a very distinctive angel that's called Matat. Matat is a short form of Metatron. And that's the full name of this malach. We call the malach Matat. Mem, Tes, Tes. And this malach is very unique and distinctive. He's called Matat Sar Hapanim. Sar Hapanim. Not the interior minister, right? That's also in Eretz Yisrael. Sar Hapanim means, Sar Hapanim, the representative of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Hanhaga HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Hanhaga, his governance, running the world, reveals itself through this Malach. I can speak about this Malach for a long time now. He's associated with the world of Yitzira, associated with the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, associated with the Hanhaga of Mishpat, with the form of governance that's Midah Keneged Midah, many different things, but it's through this Malach. Shmo Kishem Rabo. So amazing things. And it was about that Malach that Rabbi Akiva was warning Acher and the Arba Shenichnu Pardes that when they come to the place where they see Avnei Shayish Tahar, right? Remember the Gemara Chagid, don't say Mayim, meaning because you might think that there's Shtei Rishuyos, right? Because he saw the Malach Matat sitting, and nobody sits in the place of the king, everybody only stands. And because the Malach Matat is the way that a Kadosh Baruch Hu governs the world.
Is he the executive director of...
Yeah, something like that. Something like that. Yeah, executive function, the CEO, something like that. This is the Malach Matat. Now, the Malach Matat used to be a person. That person used to be called Chanoch. And the pasuk says that Chanoch, right in the beginning of Bereshit, Chanoch served Hashem on such a high level that Einenu ki lakachoto Elokim, because God took him. And Rashi says that he was such a tzaddik that Kadosh Baruch Hu didn't want that he should mess anything up. God took him, which is a huge chizuk. Sometimes people die young, right? Especially children, right? The whole Kolal Ar Shmuel, right? We saw the video last night for those who were there. That sweet little child like changes the game, right? Like Ar Shmuel. Wow, you know who Shmuel is now. Very powerful. Ki lakachoto Elohim, and he became an angel Matat. It says about Chanoch that part of his tzidkus, and this is a medrash, was that he was miyached kutchabrichu, and that's he's quoting that medrash. Miyached kutchabrichu al kol tefira. That Chanoch was a tailor, and he was busy stitching all the time. He was making clothing, and the medrash says that every stitch that he made, he did so with the yichud of Hashem. He did so consciously, with God consciousness, focusing on Hashem's presence in the act of stitching. Amazing medrash. That was his tzidkus, Chanoch, that became the Malach Matat. Now, obviously, there's Kabbalistic depth. Says the Baal Shem, what does this mean? The explanation of this is Damachshava Nikra Ein Sof. The person's thought is called infinite, because thoughts are not tangible, right? A person can think any number of thoughts. A person can imagine things that don't exist. A person can come up with everything in their brain, and he can think and think and think all the time. And that's called Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's called in the names of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, which alludes to the eternality of Hashem, Haya, Hove, V'yia, beyond our experience of time and space, which is limited. Yud Kei Vav Kei is the name that represents God's transcendent boundlessness. Yud Kei Vav Kei. V'hamaisa, action, Haya, Aleph Daled Nun Yud. The name Aleph Daled Nun Yud is the realm of action. That's this worldliness. That's a world of limitation, a world of physicality. Aleph Daled Nun Yud. When a person does an action which is which is Aleph Daled Nun Yud, which is also associated with the idea of the Shechina, which we spoke about before, which is latent godliness in the physical experience of our human condition. And a person does an action, but he does so consciously, right? It's what we said before. So he eats a ragala, but with machshava, says the Baal Shem Tov, you know what you just did? You made what's called yichud kudsha berichu ushchinte. Kudsha berichu is connected with Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's the transcendent, boundless godliness in the realms beyond. Aleph Daled Nun Yud is the Shechina, is Maisa. When you do an action consciously, you're making a yichud, you're opening up a channel between Yud Kei Vav Kei and Aleph Daled Nun Yud. This was the Baal Shem Tov, because if you just learn this, in the Arizal, you think you have to be a big Mekubal and do all these kinds of Kabbalistic meditations. And the Baal Shem Tov says, no, it's just being human. That was the Baal Shem Tov's thing. Instead of bringing heaven, earth up to heaven, which is what the Arizal wanted to do. The Baal Shem Tov brought heaven down to earth. He said all of these Kabbalistic things, they're in you. You are it. You are it. This we'll finish. That's what the pasuk is telling us. Kol asher timsa yadcha la'asos. Whatever you can do, bikochacha aseh. Ritzalomar, it means what we just learned. Ki hamachshava nikra chachma. Machshava is called koach ma. Is the same letters as chachma. Koach ma. It's the motivation, the intention that powers everything that we do. V'taseh hamaisa b'kochacha. Maisa, aleph daled nun yud. That's the aspect of Shechina, the physical. Chachma is koach, right? Koach ma, and that's yud kevavke. That's the intention. That's chachma, right? That's our mind. So the pasuk is telling you whatever you're able to do, don't just do, but bikochacha aseh. Invest it with koach. What's koach? Chachma. Intention. What's intention? Yud kevavke. And aseh is maisa. Aleph daled nun yud. Excuse me. Do the action with consciousness. Shu hamachshava lechaber shneim, to bind these two things together. Ke'ein b'shal, because the pasuk says in hell, right? Essentially, after a person leaves the world in that realm, there's nothing else. V'tevas ayin mishamish lamala lamata. You can use this word ayin. Ayin could either mean nothing, right, which is very, very negative. Ayin, right? Person has no yiras shamayim, a person has no wisdom. No ayin. But ayin, we know in Kabbalah, could also refer to the highest spiritual level called Kesser, which from our perspective is so lofty that we could only say ayin. We have no awareness of it. It's well beyond. May ayin, right, that's right. May ayin yaveh ezri can mean from where, but it could also mean, no, may ayin, from that realm of ayin, yavo ezri. That's where our help comes from. So the Baal Shem Tov says we can learn the end of the pasuk in two ways. You can either say, ki ein amasa v'cheshbon v'datz v'chachma b'shal she'ata hilech shama, that if a person doesn't live life with kochacha aseh, investing their actions with machshava, it could be terrible. Ki ein amasa v'cheshbon. But he says, you know what else it can mean? So he says, if you don't do this, and you don't really believe that mamish, you're channeling godliness down into the world by doing this, so then life is a living hell. Life is just a series of completely meaningless, arbitrary, frustrating experiences. But if a person does this properly, says the Baal Shem, that word ayin or ein can mean in a very holy way. Ki ayin masa v'cheshbon v'das v'chachma b'sha'ol asher ata hilech shama. That what otherwise would be an experience of Gehenna, just wandering around the meaningless world, ayin, you can channel down the highest levels of spirituality if whatever you can do, kol masha b'koichacha, kol asher timsa yadcha la'asos, whatever action is right in front of you, whether it's business dealings, whether it's eating, drinking, sleeping, having a conversation, schmoozing, strategizing, thinking, working, whatever it is, b'kochacha aseh. If you invest that asiya with koach, you bring about a yichud kutshabrichu ushchinte, Yud Kevavke and Aleph Daled Nun Yud, then what would have otherwise been Sha'ol Asher Ata Hilech Shama, just a mundane experience of meaninglessness, becomes Ki Ayin Masa V'Cheshbon V'das V'Chachma. You channeled down that high experience of Hashem's presence, and you're bringing about the revelation of godliness in the world, what's called Gilui Shechina. You're revealing and activating the latent presence of the divine throughout all of life. Hashem should bless us that we should be able to activate the sparks of the Shekhinah that are littered throughout every single facet of the human experience, and to feel that mamish in us is all of these secrets, all of these experiences. We should live life with vibrancy and vitality in the schus and in the derech of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
שכל כך אוהב אותי האב שלי מלך חי וקיים על כל נשימה שאני נושם